Hi, I'm Karyn Parsons, and welcome to Puffin Storytime. I am going to read today from my book, How High the Moon. And How High the Moon takes place in the Jim Crow South in America, in a little town outside of Charleston, South Carolina. It's a very small town, and it follows an 11-year-old girl named Ella. And Ella lives with her cousins, Myrna and Henry, and her grandparents in South Carolina, and it's 1944. And the story is told from three different perspectives. It's told from Ella's perspective, Henry's, and Myrna's. And Ella is 11 years old, Henry's 12, and Myrna's 14. And today I'm going to read the first chapter, which is told by Ella, and then I'm going to read a chapter by Henry. Okay. How High the Moon. What was I thinking leaving home with no shoes? Running down our driveway and onto the packed and dry dirt road, I hardly noticed my bare feet. I'd heard Granny calling after me, but the words didn't make sense until I'd already turned off into the woods toward the creek, where the fallen blackberry brambles and knobby tree limbs stabbed and scraped. "Ella, your shoes! Your shoes!" she hollered after me. I tore through the woods, my legs trying to keep pace with my pounding heart. Later at home, I discovered deep scratches and cuts covering my ankles and the soles of my feet. One cut was so deep, I'd leave a trail of blood across the porch and clear on into the kitchen. But I couldn't feel none of that now. There was just my good news. I was finally going to live in Boston with Mama. I pushed a low poplar branch out of my way and arrived at Creek's clearing just before the water's edge. I'd almost lost my hat twice on the way to the creek. It blew clear off my head. Dirt and broken leaves clung to the dark felt, making it dusty and gray, and I beat at them till they finally came loose. No one in Clarendon County had a hat like mine. A Stetson Cavalry. I'd found it in the woods, caked in a layer of dry brown earth. The black felt didn't have a single nick or worn patch. The gold braid round the brim wasn't frayed at all. I'd taken it home and cleaned it up good as new. Still, some folks took issue with me, a girl, sporting such a hat. I paid them no mind. I was my own boss and did things my way, just like my mama. I spotted Henry below, ankle deep in the water with his trousers rolled up, bouncing his fishing line up and down. He insisted it made the big fish take the worm for a sick fish that was easy prey. Heck, how would he know? He never did catch nothing. "Henry," I called, waving the telegram high over my head. "Come stay with me in Boston," is what it said. Stay. She didn't say visit. She said come stay. Still, I knew it was a trial of sorts. Mama always said that with all the work she had to do, it'd be hard for her to look after me. I was going to need to prove to her that I had grown up enough to take care of myself. "It wouldn't be fair to you, Ella," she'd said before, "but one day you'll be big enough." And now, that one day had come. I'd show Mama that I could cook and clean and even make life easier for her. I was grown now. I wouldn't get in the way. Henry stopped bouncing the line and squinted up at me. With one hand on his hip and the other shielding his eyes from the sun, he jutted his chin toward the telegram. "What's that?" "I'm going to Boston." I ran down to him, slapped the telegram on his chest, and flopped down on the grass. The air had the crisp snap of autumn and its perfectly clear blue skies. Everything smelled clean. I closed my eyes and felt the warm sun on my face. "Wait, what do you mean you're going there, to Boston?" Just hearing that out loud made me spring to my feet and do a little dance. Boston was nothing like South Carolina. Up there, colored folks could go anywhere they wanted. And you didn't have to wait for church to dress in fancy clothes. Fancy was just life. There was all kinds of people from all over the world. Italian, Chinese, French, and they brought their food with them there too. You could eat Chinese food in Boston. Everything was big and everything was real clean and nice. People there were sophisticated. My mama had been living up there for so long that when she came to visit us in Alcaloo, you could see the difference in her a mile away. She'd be walking up the road and folks would take note before they even made out the features of her face. I mean, sure, she'd always stood out from the rest, had always been different from the other folks in our little town, but now they gave it a name. She was a city girl. Can you believe it? I spun around, did a fan kick. An envelope fell out of the side pocket of my overalls. Oh, shoot, Henry. I handed him the letter. I almost forgot. This is for you. Henry's face beamed when he looked at the letter and recognized the handwriting. His daddy had been fighting in the war for almost 2 years, and Henry missed him something awful. He saved every letter his daddy sent, and sometimes he'd even sit down on his bed and read them all, from the first one to the last, like they was a book. Thanks, I'll read it later. He tucked it in his front pocket and did his best to hide his smile. Getting a letter from his daddy made him happier than anything, but Henry didn't want to make me feel bad that I didn't have a daddy to send me letters. I pointed to the place he'd stashed the envelope. Maybe Mama's ready to tell me about my daddy, I said. Granny already said he's in California. Henry sat down on a tall, dry rock in the creek and rubbed his heels on its rough surface. Yeah, but that's all I know. I want to know why they ain't together no more and why he went to California in the first place. I stuck my toes in the cool water along the edge of the creek and wrapped them around a small rock, trying to lift it. I know I used to say I thought my daddy was doing some secret spy work for the war, but now I'm starting to think... What? Henry asked. Don't laugh, I warned. He raised his eyebrows, a grin already twisting the corners of his mouth. I took a breath. I'm starting to seriously think that my daddy is Cab Calloway. Henry grabbed his belly and teetered back and forth like an egg on a plate. He almost fell over into the creek laughing. What? You mean the jazz singer Cab Calloway? You mean Minnie the Moocher Cab Calloway? Henry hooted. Ella, you's crazy. Cut it out. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. He's in the jazz world, like Mama. He looks like he could be my daddy, all light complected and all. And now he's off in California, making movies. Henry looked like he might bust a gut. Okay. You laugh all you want, but how come we ain't got no pictures of my daddy? Nobody does. What's that about? It's because they think I'll tell everyone and then all the gossip papers will be on our doorstep. But when Mama sees that I'm not a little girl anymore, that I can keep a secret, she'll open up. You watch. Henry nodded and shrugged. He wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and caught his breath. So you gonna be up in Boston for Christmas? He asked. I pointed to the telegram. She said she'll send for me in a couple months. That's 2, right? So that'll be before Christmas, yeah. How long you reckon you gonna stay? He was staring down at my telegram, reading it over carefully and frowning. Well, once I show Mama how mature I'll become, that I can take care of myself pretty good and not get in her hair none, I think. Then I stopped. I've been so full with the excitement of being with Mama, her sweet vanilla smell against my cheek, that I hadn't thought about how it might all hit Henry. I hadn't been thinking of the whole picture. Henry and I were cousins, but it was common knowledge that we were also the best of friends. We were only 1 year apart, me being 11 and him 12. He knew me better than anyone, and it went the same way for me about him. Thick as thieves, Poppy would say. We both been raised by Granny and Poppy for most of our lives, just us and our cousin Myrna. Ever since she turned 14, she didn't want to have nothing to do with us. But Henry and I, we never been separated. And now the look on his face said it all. Of course, I'll have to come back to get all my stuff, I said. And then I guess I'll come back to visit sometimes. What stuff? He scowled at me. Oh, I don't know, Henry, but I'll be back, I said. You really gonna go live up there? Up in Boston? He held the fishing pole in one hand and scratched wildly over his whole scalp with the other. I think it's time, I said. I think Mama thinks it's time. Where you go to school? He asked. He'd stopped scratching and had his hand on his hip. There's schools in Boston too, Henry. But you don't know nobody. He stood, looked into the water, and started bouncing the fishing line again. I'll meet new folks. At my new school, there'll be... Who's going to feed the chickens and feed Bear? And y'all don't need me for all that. Come on, Henry. Just seems like you're acting like this ain't a good thing. Now, come on, Ella. I never said that. Then be happy for me. What? What are you talking about? I am. He finally stopped bouncing the line and looked up from the creek. We stared at each other for a moment, silent. Neither one of us knew what to say. I finally looked away, down at the gurgling water under Henry's feet. A single white feather was balanced on its surface. Henry looked down and saw it too. We watched as the creek carried it past us, over the rocks and away, until it disappeared around a curve of trees and brush. Henry read the telegram one last time. He lifted the fishing pole from the water, stood it upright, and let it lean against his body while he folded the piece of paper in half, carefully matching the corners. A suspender fell from his bony shoulder and he folded it again, and then once more. "Aw, you gonna miss me, Henry?" I teased, and I smiled at my cousin, then grabbed hold of the fishing pole and shoved him aside. I was better at fishing than Henry had ever been, and he knew it. I always caught more fish than he did. He was a good teacher, though. Heck, he had taught me everything I knew. Still, it irked him that he never seemed to have the same good luck. Made a point of reminding me where I had learned my skills whenever he could. He shrugged. I leaned over and gave him a poke in the ribs. When he pushed my hand, I poked the other side where I hit a tickly spot, and he let out a short, unexpected laugh. I gave a tickle to his armpit before he could block me, and he laughed some more. Soon I was poking and tickling him all over, and we were both laughing. "Stop!" He waved his hands and shook his head. He was trying to fight his smile. I stopped and looked into his face, making him meet my eyes. When he finally did, he said, "Yeah, of course. Of course I'll miss you." He handed the neatly folded telegram to me. "I think it's great, Ella. I am happy for you. What do you think you're going to do there?" "I don't know. I'm sure Mama will think of some fun stuff for us to do." I waded out a little farther into the cold creek. "Maybe we'll go to a restaurant." "Yeah," Henry said. He was trying to smile for me, but was still chewing on his lip and frowning a little. "Heck, just getting to stay with her at her house will be great, you know?" I tried not to show it, but the thought made my heart jump. "I wonder where she lives," he said. "What her house is like. Think it's big?" "I don't know. Granny says Boston's a big city, and that when the cities are big, the houses are small. Either way, don't matter to me." Something yanked on the line. "Henry, grab it!" I shoved the line into his hands. He staggered a bit, battling the strength of the fish. The pole curved. Henry held on tight. As he reeled it out of the water, a 2-foot-long largemouth bass flailed about wildly. "Whoa," I heard myself say. "Can you get it?" Henry's legs straddled the rocky creek's edge while his feet gripped the jagged stones. The muscles of his skinny arms tightened, struggling to keep hold of the big fish. "Oh, man!" he exclaimed, face twisted tight. Finally, he had it high enough out of the water that he was able to fling it over to the rocks near me, where it thrashed some more. "Dang thing's really moving," he shouted, half at me, half at the fish. He kept reaching for it, then drawing back, unsure of how to attack. "You just gotta grab it, Henry," I shouted. "I know." The largemouth bass escaped his grip a few more times. Henry finally managed to free the hook from its mouth and tossed the fish into the bucket he brought from the house. "Nice job," I told him. He laughed and wiped the sweat from his face with his handkerchief. "Man," he panted, "it's big." "Sure is." A large cloud blocked the sun, giving us a needed moment of shade. "Just think, Henry, after I've been up there a little while, you can come up and visit. You can visit all the time," I said. He thought about it a moment. "I'd like to see Boston," he said. "Of course you would. Get out of this boring old place." We watched as the bass's thrashing slowed, then stopped altogether, his gaze fixed on somewhere far away. After reeling in his big catch, we were ready to head home. "I think if I had my choice, I'd definitely be a Tuskegee Airman." I stopped to lean against a tree and pull a burr from the bottom of my foot. "Getting to fly them fighter planes? You kidding me?" With my arms outstretched, I flew through the woods. "They're airmen. Ain't no girls flying fighter planes," said Henry, trying to keep up with me. I'd be the first one then. I called over my shoulder at Henry, only half paying attention to where I was headed, so it wasn't until I was already close to him that I saw the boy. Sitting in the V of a large oak tree was a white boy I'd never seen before. Must have been about 14 years old. He had the look of someone who just smelled something bad, and there were little craters on his cheeks. There weren't any white folks living over on this side of the tracks except for the Parkers who owned the local store. Folks passed through, but it was unusual to see a white boy just plop down in the woods like that. "The first what?" he asked. I looked down. "Oh, nothing, sir," I said. Henry was quickly by my side, walking fast. His hand at his side motioned me to keep on walking. I followed Henry, but the boy jumped up from the tree and began to follow us. "Where'd you get that hat, girl?" he asked, thumping the back of my Stetson. I was stepping on thorns but didn't dare stop. "Found it," I answered. "Stole it," he barked in my ear, then thumped my hat again. "No, sir," I said. I was trying to move fast, but he was moving faster and with little effort. He walked alongside me, smiling now. "I said, where'd you get that hat, girl?" I kept walking. "Answer me, girl." "Sir?" I didn't know why he kept asking me that or what he wanted me to say back. I'd already told the truth. Henry was leading us to the road. We'd be there soon, and then out in the open, the boy might go on home. "How old are you?" he asked, flipping my braid, then thumping my hat once more. 11, sir," I whispered. Thump. I saw the road out in front of us and felt relief flood my body. I couldn't wait no more. I ran. Took off for the road and down it for home. Henry was right on my heels. "Hey!" I heard the boy call. I don't think he followed, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't look back. Okay, this is Henry. It's hard to draw hands. That's why I decided to do a traditional from the shoulders up portrait. No struggling with the thumbs and knuckles. To make it realistic, I had to examine myself in Granny's hand mirror. My skin is as smooth as one of Ella's dolls. There ain't no teeny holes on my nose like Poppy's, or creases. Granny and Poppy both have deep creases running through their faces like an interstate map. All different directions, some deep, some not so. Looks like there's no rhyme or reason to them until Granny smiles. Then I see the lines helping to shape the happiness on her face. I see why they're there, and I see that I have them when I smile too, only mine disappear after I'm done. Granny's been happy for so long that she's trained her face to keep them happy lines. I just started drawing my left eye when Myrna came calling, telling me it was time to head out to the creek. I'd been up early before everyone so I could sweep the barn, pump water for the animals in the house, and bring in the last of the wood Poppy chopped the night before. I wanted to be sure to have time to get some of my drawing in. We'd been talking about going fishing all week. Myrna had stopped going to the creek with us so much, so this was sort of a treat. The weatherman on the radio said it'd be nice, a good day for fishing, clear and warm, but not hot, and there'd be lots of largemouth bass in the river. I was still excited for my last catch. It ain't every day that I get a fish. Poppy taught me how to fish when I was 5. We'd go out early morning, just the two of us. I loved listening to the stories he'd tell as we walked past Creek's clearing all the way down to the river it flowed into. I loved the quiet of our walk, the breeze sweeping through the trees causing that soft rustle like faraway applause. The air always felt so clean and wet. The sun would just be coming up and everything was still and new. Granny and Poppy didn't like us kids hanging around the river, thought it was too dangerous, so we fished in the creek. But when I was with Poppy, we'd head a little further down, throw our lines off the bank of that wide, powerful river. He taught me which rocks were the best to turn over in search of worms and how to hook them so the fish would swallow the entire hook instead of just nibbling the bait right off. His cast was effortless. It took me a long time to get that right, but after lots of practice, working real hard at it, I finally did. Now I can find bait better than anybody. I can load a hook real good, and I can cast almost as good as Poppy. I don't have a lot of luck catching fish, though. Everyone says there's a little bit of luck in it. Even Myrna, who don't care a thing about catching a fish, usually does better than me. Sometimes, though, I wondered if it wasn't me or my luck, but my bait. Maybe if I had something special, a beautiful, shiny lure, things would go different for me. "Y'all taking too long," Myrna called from the hall. "I'm coming," I heard Ella yell back. "Stop shouting right through the whole house." Granny was coming from the kitchen as I stepped out into the hall. She handed Myrna a paper sack. "There are bologna and biscuits and 3 pears. I could smell the freshly baked biscuits. "And sweet tea." She nodded at the metal canteen she held out for me. I took it and kissed the soft paper-thin skin of her cheek. "And pick me up some rice from Parker's on your way home." Parker's was Alkalu's general store and about 1.5 miles from our house in the center of town. Just about anything we couldn't get from our land or our animals, we got from Parker's. Baking flour, laundry soap, door latches, ice cream. Often Poppy would stop in at Parker's first before he went to Charleston with all his produce to sell. He'd check with Mr. Parker to see if he wanted to buy some fat turnips or a bunch of Poppy's juicy watermelons. Sometimes Poppy traded for a shovel he needed or a new hammer. We'd known the Parkers our whole life, and even though it was white, they always treated us kindly. Myrna insisted we stop at Parker's to get the rice on our way to the creek instead of on our way home because she wanted to meet up with Loretta and Peggy later. We protested, but as usual, she ignored Ella and me and just walked straight for the store. As we approached the shop, a large white woman I'd never seen before came hurrying up the front steps. Her makeup was heavy and unnatural. Even though she was a grown lady, she only came up to my height, and she was almost as wide as she was tall. Ella was already half in the front door when the lady pushed her way inside. Their bellies touched as she passed, and she sucked her teeth and let out an annoyed sigh. A word, quiet and tight, escaped her lips. I couldn't quite make it out, but I was pretty sure what she said from the disgusted look she threw our way. Ella turned to me and crossed her eyes. I looked away so fast so I wouldn't start laughing out loud. As the woman waddled toward Mr. Parker at the back of the store, I heard her say, "Why you gotta have those nasty kids up in here all the time?" Myrna sighed and motioned for us to join her inside. "Don't you mind her," she said, her voice low. "I don't care what that ugly pink lady says," Ella grumbled. In a flash, Myrna had her by the ear, and though it was a whisper, it was sharp and deadly. "Don't you start." Ella pulled herself free. "Cut it out," she whispered back. Mr. Parker and the woman were too busy finishing up their sale to notice us fussing at the front of the store. Once the woman finally left, we headed for the counter at the rear of the store. Mrs. Parker and little Millie Parker had just come in through the back and were pushing a fresh tub of ice cream over to Mr. Parker. Ice cream at Parker's was always our favorite thing of all, and since we hadn't had breakfast yet, it was near impossible to ignore the new batch of peach ice cream Mr. Parker was loading into one of the big tubs. It looked like pale orange butter. Myrna and Ella ran to the ice cream counter and watched as he scraped the edges of the giant barrel with a long wooden spoon. I was on my way over too when the fishing lures caught my eye. I stopped in front of the display. They were all the colors of the rainbow all at once. They were shiny and silvery with pinks and blues and yellows and greens. They were shaped like miniature versions of big fish, long and pointy, round and flat. I traced my finger over a yellow and green lure with black stripes and flecks of pink. "Beauty," I heard myself say, though I hadn't meant to say it out loud. I looked up, but it seemed nobody had heard me. They were too busy listening to Millie talk about the circus. "The clown picked me up to get up on the stage. I was so scared." Millie Parker was 6 years old and had a bit of a little girl crush on me, I think. If Myrna and Ella came to the store without me, she always asked where I was and when I'd be coming in again. Often I caught her looking at me and smiling. Even though she was only 6, it still made me feel kind of embarrassed for her to be looking at me all dreamy-eyed. "Oh, she liked it though," Mr. Parker teased. "She thought she was a movie star." I still held back, mesmerized by the fishing lures. "Bonnie whipped up this peach batch just this morning," Mr. Parker was saying. Why don't you try it out, Ella? Let me know if it's a winner, Mrs. Parker added. I glanced over when I heard her. Mrs. Parker was a tall woman with light brown hair that she pulled off her face into a pile of curls on top of her head. Her eyebrows were furry as caterpillars and almost met in the middle. The most fascinating thing, though, was her eyes. They was two different colors. One was a brilliant emerald green and the other one was hazel. She walked over to Ella and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. She didn't even look at Myrna. She favored Ella, calling her pretty a lot and playing with her hair. Ella didn't seem to mind too much. She mostly minded it because Myrna did. We'll call it a breakfast taster cone, no charge. She smiled and headed to the back. Mr. Parker dropped the large empty barrel on the floor behind him and reached for the cones. Thank you, Myrna and Ella called out. Millie shouted to me. Hi, Henry, she waved. Y'all going fishing? I want to go. Daddy, can I go fishing with Henry? Millie, you know you can't go fishing. You're going into town with your mama today, remember? You should be getting ready. Millie pouted and dropped her head dramatically. I'm sorry, Henry, I can't go with you. That's okay, Millie. Another time, I said. She ran out the back calling for her mama. Millie had been asking to go fishing with us since forever, and her dad always gave her some reason that she couldn't. Come get your peach cone, Henry. It's a brand new batch, Ella said. I started, my mind on the lures in front of me. Then I quickly walked to the counter and held a hand out to Ella to take the cone before I thanked Mr. Parker. After Myrna finished paying for the rice we were meant to get, Mr. Parker handed her the rice and a sack of sugar. This is a little something extra for Granny. I know it's been hard to come by with the war rationing going on, he said. Myrna beamed. She put the rice in her bag and handed the sugar to Ella to carry. Thank you, sir. Thanks to the war, it had been about a year since the country had started watching how much sugar we used. Suddenly there was a limited supply. Our favorite pies and cakes didn't come so often, only on real special occasions. As we headed to the exit, Deputy Ryan entered the shop. Poppy always said he looked too young to be carrying a gun, and it was true. I don't think he'd lost all his baby fat yet. Had a face like one of them baby angels you see in the paintings in museums and churches. Dang, you folks really do like your ice cream, he said, pointing at our cones. It's a bit early, ain't it? Myrna and Ella shrugged. Then Ella said, but it's good. He let out a short snort and headed for Mr. Parker inside. Once we were on the front porch and the door had closed behind us, Myrna glared back inside. I don't like him. Oh, why you gotta be hating everybody? He ain't that bad, Ella said. What do you know, Miss Pretty Girl? It came out sing-songy and laced with mean. Ella's nostrils started to flare and Myrna stepped closer to her, pulling at her braids. Ooh, what pretty hair. What pretty skin. Cut it out, Myrna. Ella moved away off the porch, but Myrna followed her. You don't look like all them other Negroes, Ella. You is special. She pulled a braid and flung it into Ella's face. Stop! Ella slapped Myrna's hand away from her hard, and I practically felt the hot sting of it. They were both frozen and still for a moment. Then Myrna cut Ella a nasty look, sucked her teeth, and walked on for the creek. I held back. Ice cream covered most of my hand. I hadn't been able to take a lick of it. I couldn't think straight. Ella, I said quietly. My left hand was still in my pocket, frozen there. She turned to me. What, Henry? Dang, boy, you a mess. She walked back to me on the porch and wiped my hand off. What's wrong, Henry? Don't be mad about that murder. I'm not. She'll say I hit her, but she deserved it. You saw her. She was asking for it. I stole a quick look over my shoulder to be sure no one was looking before I turned to Ella and finally pulled my hand from my pocket. My palm was clenched so tight that I could feel my fingernails making deep crescent-shaped ditches in the center of my hand. My fingers hesitated to relax themselves, but finally did. Ella stared at my open palm and the colorful speckled lure in my hand. Her jaw dropped, and she sucked in a quick rush of air. Her eyes moved toward mine. Henry, no. I shook my head and closed my fist again. I know. She stared at me, still in disbelief, waiting for me to say something. No, there's nothing. No, you gotta go put that back now. But I can't, I said, and gestured toward the store with the deputy inside. Ella bit her bottom lip hard and frowned. She seemed to search for our answer among the wooden floorboards of the porch. Okay, then we both go in. I'll ask Mr. Parker if he got any kites. Kites? Ella, kites don't come in till the first week of summer. Right, and then I'll be able to say, oh, you don't? How come? When are you gonna get some? You have any left over from last summer? That'll give you plenty of time, right? You don't need any more time than that. I'm sorry, Ella. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking, let's just do this before it's too late, before he realizes it's gone. Ella pushed open the front door of the shop and we walked square into the deputy who was on his way out. You kids are still here? What are you hanging around for? He was scowling at us while flicking a toothpick about in his teeth. Forgot something, Ella said, head bent and barreling past him before he had a chance to ask any more questions. I followed, hoping to God he couldn't see the moisture collecting along my hairline. I didn't say a word. I knew anything that came out would be accompanied by a telltale stutter. Behind me, I heard the bell over the shop's door. I looked over my shoulder and saw the deputy head down the porch stairs and climb into his patrol car. Back so fast? Mr. Parker asked. He walked straight to us. Ella quickly tried to move farther into the store and distract him there so I could easily get to the lure display unseen, but Mr. Parker closed in fast. He stopped directly next to the lure cabinet. Yes, sir. We was wondering. Ella wandered off to the far right of the store and pretended to be looking for something there. Do you have any kites? Ella, I think you know we ain't got no kites. It's October, Mr. Parker said. His gaze turned away from Ella and towards me. His eyes narrowed just a hair, and he looked at me, my dripping cone, and my clenched fist. My eyes darted away quickly. I committed myself to staring at the ground, praying for invisibility. Well, sometimes I think you have some leftover ones hanging around. I think I seen some over here the other day. Ella was desperately trying to get him to follow her. Mr. Parker, over here, I think. Around this area, I think I seen him. I could still feel his eyes about to burn a hole in me. Henry? I looked up. Mr. Parker's eyes were what you call aquamarine, the color of the ocean in the tropics. Clean, clear blue. But I wasn't feeling any kind of tranquility. Looking into those eyes, I began to feel my legs quake. The more I tried to stop the shaking, the more obvious it became. Yes, sir. He folded his arms across his chest, took a deep breath, and let it out slow. Finally, he spoke. You don't eat that cone, I might never give you a freebie again, he said, and turned away from me and walked to Ella. So you say you think there's leftover kites around here, huh? He knew. I was sure he knew, but he didn't say nothing. I quickly dropped the lure back in its place and wiped my wet palm on my pant leg. Peach ice cream had dripped all the way down to my elbow. I licked at the cone and used my soggy napkin to clean myself the best I could. Then I walked over to Ella and Mr. Parker. Granny always told me to take deep, long breaths when I was feeling nervous, and that it was a sure way to calm you down. I got 3 good long breaths in before I reached them. They were bent over down near the paper and pencils. Ella saw me walk up. Her eyes lit up and she tried to hide her smile. Funny, she said, straightening. I was sure I'd seen some summer kites here. Mr. Parker stood and turned to see me behind him. He put a hand on my shoulder and walked me back toward the front of the store. Ella walked with us. Well, we'll have more come May, he said. When we reached the lure cabinet, he stopped, looked inside, then looked back to me, but I pretended to be fixed on the door. He patted my shoulder, then continued walking me to the front door. Y'all better catch up to Myrna. You'll catch heck if you make her wait too long. Once we were outside and I had crossed the road, I turned around and saw Mr. Parker standing out on the porch watching us go. He smiled at me and folded his arms across his chest. I smiled back. I don't know what got into me, why I did something so foolish, but I knew I wouldn't do nothing like that again. It wasn't who I was. I think maybe Mr. Parker had known that before I even did.